Last time when I talked about slimes, I mentioned that I had four broad categories of slimes. I have the main varieties that make up most of the slimes in the world of Atham. There are rare atypical varieties, which are just different or more extreme versions of the main varieties. There are man-made hybrids called deviants, and there are groups of slimes connected to specific locations and historical events. In this video, I'll go through the main varieties. That's where a good chunk of my effort has gone, and as it turns out, my main varieties are enough for 14 pages, which will be like, 30 minutes if my estimations are decent. Also, when I say main varieties, I simply mean types of slimes that are common in this world. They're considered the main variety of a group because they're the most common of the slimes that share similar characteristics. Atypicals are the rarer counterparts that people in Atham presume to be connected to one of the main varieties. There can be multiple atypical varieties connected to the main one, or the parent variety, which is what they're called in these entries. I'm going to pretend that made sense and move on. Each entry is broken up into 4 paragraphs, which are worded like a guidebook written in universe. I'll read each entry and put text on screen to show which one I'm reading, and maybe I'll add some extra comments about it depending on how I feel. Red slimes are the most common variety by far and grow at a notoriously high rate, their core reaching a maximum diameter of 4 inches in a matter of a week. They almost exclusively appear in and around settlements of various sizes, often serving as a nuisance to large cities. This type of slime is one of the most docile and harmless. Even when provoked, they can only ram attackers with minimal success. Much like other plain varieties, red slimes are very social and easy to befriend, making them a perfect first slime for those wishing to get into ranching or to just understand them better. Many commoners keep them around because they fit quite well into groups, most of which are family households due to their harmlessness. They're essentially the poster child for slimes as a whole. Their semi-translucent red gel is a staple of modern society and serves as the base for many basic foods. It's edible, bland, and creates a bread-like consistency when mixed. It absorbs flavors like no other, and is extremely easy to work with as it has a low potency and no even remotely harmful properties. Many ranchers keep these in large numbers since the demand for their gel is always high and they're easy to contain. They're cheap to buy and easy to find if one looks for them. Red slimes can, and occasionally do, crystallize inside people's homes after all. Orange slimes are most often found in or around labor camps, mines, construction sites, training grounds, farms, or any other place where physical labor is a constant. They grow to a core size of 6 inches over roughly 3 weeks, and they're usually more of a pest than anything. Due to their abnormally high density and weight, they knock things over, trample plants, and end up being roadblocks without much effort. They're stubborn and very strong-willed. They can take at least 2 people to shove them out of the way if they decide they don't want to move, but they'll likely just return after being moved. They don't particularly care if they're being an inconvenience to people they don't know, and will continue to do so out of some kind of spite. Aside from that, they're very protective and are the first ones to put themselves between their favorite person and any potential harm. Orange gel is unusually dense and much, much heavier than one would expect. It weighs nearly as much as solid gold does, which makes it a bit of a pain to transport and store. It can amplify other properties, but the exponential increase of weight and density severely limits how much can be used at a time. The gel is mostly used for construction materials, but it sees use in some foods as well. It does have a light coppery taste, however. Demand for both the slimes and gel vary significantly. Naturally, it skyrockets when there's large-scale construction being done or if there are repairs needed somewhere. They're easy to find and the hardest plain variety to keep contained. Now, it's not really saying much, but ranches need slightly stronger enclosures for them in comparison. Yellow slimes are a bit of an enigma when it comes to any varieties. They seem to be able to crystallize just about anywhere at fairly equal rates across the board. The only places they don't crystallize are underground. Their growth rate is also a mystery, as it seems to be semi-random. They reach a core diameter of 3 inches after somewhere between several days to a couple of months. There are a number of theories, but the most prominent one is that, much like their gel, it changes relative to the weather. The attitude of yellow slimes can be summed up as curious. They're particularly nosy and will push things around just to see what happens, as well as try to enter areas or places they shouldn't. If the yellow slime understands spoken language, it'll take great joy in listening to stories and often prods for more when the storyteller stops. They'll even approach random people and nudge them to get a response. It's safe to say that they are very friendly overall. Yellow gel has a range of properties that change based on the immediate environment and overall weather. The two factors that make the most difference are temperature and humidity. It also seems to change based on where it is on the continent and whether or not there's a storm system passing through, but those circumstances are far more vague and have less of an impact. All of the properties it can have are related to taste, texture, and temperature, so it's almost exclusively used for food. Because of the inconsistent properties of yellow gel, the demand for it is low. Although it's not uncommon for various establishments to keep some in stock and use it to cut costs when possible, as it can be used as a substitute if the weather is right. It's not difficult to get a yellow slime, as many ranchers will end up with some whether they like it or not. You don't have to go out and find yellow slimes, they'll find you. Green slimes are decently rare when compared to other plain varieties. They mostly appear in settlements with a dense population, and even then it's usually underground somewhere. Their core grows to 4 inches in diameter after around a month. Other biological organisms leave them alone because they're extremely toxic and cause significant health issues if even a small amount of gel is ingested. They coexist with other slimes just fine, however. They're relatively low energy and don't really react to provocation of any kind. In groups, they're always part of the defense to separate attackers from the other slimes, as they're quite protective over those they know, both human and inhuman. They are more inclined to just hang out nearby anyone they bonded to without actively communicating all that much. While their gel is incredibly dangerous, it has addictive and mildly euphoric effects in very small amounts. It's only ever used in the creation of drugs or poisons, which has gotten it completely outlawed in nearly every country on the continent. Extended use of any drug made using green gel rapidly deteriorates a person's health while also making them highly dependent on it. People who find them are required to report them, or turn them in, and can be arrested just for having one. Ranch owners that are discovered to be keeping them are imprisoned and have any ranching licenses permanently revoked, while the slimes themselves are destroyed. This is the only variety to be recognized by law as a danger to society. Blue slimes are in average existence similar to red slimes, but they tend to appear more in highly populated areas such as major cities. They reach a core size of 4.5 inches after a little under a month, and they usually stick around near where they crystallize, not straying all that far. Like most other plain varieties, they have no real way to defend themselves. It's pretty easy to get along with blue slimes, as they're relatively calm and low energy. They like to hang out with groups and are more than willing to communicate with strangers as long as they're with a person they know. They're a common occupant of places that serve food and drinks. Glue gel is perfectly edible, but it's quite bitter on its own and has an effect similar to traditional alcohol. There aren't any real negative side effects unless you have too much at a time. It's a staple for bars and inns in particular, but it's used for drinks of all kinds, no matter how rich the venue is. Blue slime gel has a constant demand, so ranchers often keep at least a dozen on hand at all times. They're fairly easy to obtain since they're not super uncommon. Plenty of people interested in mixing their own drinks have one. Purple slimes can be a bit hard to come by since they tend to crystallize in very densely packed areas that could be considered more modern. They grow to a core size of 4 inches after an absurd 4 months. It's theorized that it takes much longer for their core to grow due to their inherent intelligence. They're mostly seen around industrial areas, since they seem to be innately drawn towards machinery. Compared to other slime varieties, they are the smartest by a mile and then some. Their ability to understand ideas and solve problems is extraordinary, surpassing most all humans with their highly analytical thinking. Patience is an important factor when it comes to purple slimes, as they're quite shy and prefer to stay out of sight. They're particularly sensitive to tones and don't enjoy being towered over. So sitting or crouching and sounding as friendly as possible is ideal for bonding. They can get attached fairly easily if that method is used, but they can also be somewhat depressive sometimes. Purple gel is one of the few gels that are closer to the actual definition of slime. It doesn't leave any residue, but it's extremely slick and difficult to handle in any capacity. Many of its uses involve either lubricants or softeners due to its properties. It's not great for anything else, and it's rather hard to stomach in anything but small amounts. Thankfully, it only tastes like paper. Purple slimes themselves are far more valuable than their gel and very often serve as assistants for various institutions all across the continent. Every self-respecting scientist should take the time to learn how to communicate with slimes, even if it's only to be able to understand a colleague's purple slime. There's not too much demand for purple gel considering its more specific uses, but it's far from a bad idea for ranchers to have one or two for helping with logistics. Pink slimes are considered by most to be an atypical version of red slimes, for no particular reason other than color, and that they both appear in settlements. Although they have a 6-inch core and growth time of 2 weeks. They're not actually atypicals, but that's fine. Naturally, pink slimes are harder to come across, but it's not too difficult for someone determined to find one. Another shared attribute is the total harmlessness. You'd have to put real effort into provoking a pink slime to get it to do anything other than chirp and squeak like it doesn't have a care in the world. They're about as friendly with strangers as they are with people they know. They tend to ignore any concepts of personal space and get super close to or totally climb on top of anyone they are interacting with. Pink slime gel is technically safe and edible, but it's so sickly sweet that it takes a special kind of person to eat it straight and not throw up. It's used exclusively in foods, most of which are candies and desserts, although a creative individual can find uses for it outside of sweets. Considering how easy pink slimes are to deal with and their low rarity, the majority of ranchers keep a few just for the sake of it. Everybody loves a delicious treat every now and then. Black slimes are an uncommon variety as far as the plain varieties go, usually crystallizing in more remote settlements with low populations. They reach a core size of a meager 2 inches after 2.5 weeks. This slime has gone, and still goes by multiple different names, mostly depending on education level and societal class. Many know it by its official classification, black slime, but it also goes by rebound slime, usually amongst adventurers and travelers, rubber slime by the more educated and interested, and young children often call it the kickball slime, Lovingly, of course. Why it's still called so many different names is a slight mystery, but the reasons for these names are not. This slime has the curious ability to solidify itself into an exceptionally tough, rubbery material that can bounce easily on all surfaces, minus liquids. And even then it can bounce somewhat without sinking. It's a surprisingly effective defense mechanism and method of travel. Black slimes are outgoing and extremely forgiving. They communicate a lot and don't show any hesitation with new people. Physical violence doesn't seem to bother them at all, as they enjoy being kicked and thrown regardless of the reason for it. They seemingly get along better with kids or people who speak in a way that's very easy to understand. They take interest in simpler games meant for children and like to participate where possible. This usually means they end up as the ball for more athletic games and sports. They take immense joy in being kicked back and forth across a field. Black gel is thicker than most other gels and gains a sort of rubbery elasticity once removed from the slime. It can transfer this property to anything it's mixed with, but it causes most minerals to shatter and makes foods unchewable. However, it does mix well with organic materials such as wood. This makes it useful in the production of specific types of toys, but it rarely sees any use beyond that. The demand for black slimes is basically non-existent in a general commercial sense, so it's very rare for a ranch to have one unless the ranch owner has children who like them. Many black slimes end up living in and around schools and orphanages for younger children. Color slimes are a little difficult to obtain due to the specificity of where they appear, in meadows and fields near settlements. Once in the right spot, it's hard to not run into one. They grow to a core size of 5 inches over about 2.5 weeks. Their body is a swirling mixture of colors that's incredibly hard to miss. Some are tinted toward a specific color, but they're all rainbows in their own right. They're officially classified as a plain variety due to the lack of distinct defense mechanisms, and because they don't fit any of the elemental criteria. Color slimes are curious by nature and a little shy when it comes to interacting with unfamiliar beings, people or otherwise. They tend to watch from afar, so one has to be patient if they want to befriend them. They're big on listening in and like to explore as long as it's with someone else. They get pretty attached. Color gel loses any tint that the slime it came from may have, defaulting to a standard full-spectrum rainbow. It's quite sour, so its most popular use is in sour candies and foods. It can also add some flair to something if you want it to be as colorful as possible. The demand for color gel is low, so not many ranchers bother to obtain them. Not much is needed per recipe, and most of it is gathered from personal slimes as a bit of extra money when needed. Some people just keep them around because they're fun to look at. Fire slimes are a constant presence at the mouths of active volcanoes and deep inside any cave systems nearby. But they also appear in the wake of wildfires, in raised settlements, and after brutal sieges. They grow to a 4-inch core in roughly a month and stick around well after the initial damage is done, sometimes starting new fires or exacerbating existing damage. They're not aggressive by any means, but they can give off enough heat to cause third-degree burns just by holding your hand over them. If actually threatened, they'll spit cones of flames hot enough to warp steel. Needless to say, attackers are typically roasted alive. Domesticated fire slimes are usually calm and very careful about their body temperature around those they're attached to. They're fairly smart and well aware of how destructive they can be, and most have a tendency toward freaking out if they mess up. While they'll control their temperature without complaint, they really enjoy being able to let loose and be helpful at the same time, which is why acting as the hot coals of the forge makes them very happy. The glowing red and orange gel maintains a seriously painful temperature on its own, and needs special bottles to keep. Most of the usefulness comes from the slime itself, but the gel is used in a number of home temperature regulation devices as well as high-grade winter coats. Also, a drop of it in your cooking recipe helps keep food warm longer and gives it a spicy kick. Whoever discovered that was either very brave or very stupid. Fire slimes aren't particularly expensive, but the average person or ranch isn't going to have any. Demand for gel is lower than the demand for the slimes themselves. The only problem with that is that they crystallize after destructive events. Not many people are going to climb an active volcano to get one. They're naturally popular in frigid climates, but they have uses everywhere with smiths of all kinds. They make very good travel companions too. Energy slimes are quite the rarity because of the circumstances necessary for them to appear. They only crystallize during abnormally harsh weather or in the midst of a significant natural disaster. They scatter rather quickly to go join other slimes, where it takes them nearly 5 months for their core to grow to a meager 3 inches. The going theory is that they need the extra time to strengthen their core to withstand their own defense mechanism. Their core vibrates, turning its gel from pale yellow to glowing white over the course of several seconds, then it explodes. Anything within 10 feet of it might as well be considered a goner, but the slime itself is never affected by it. There's a roughly 30-second sort of cooldown period before it'll try again. Not only are energy slimes hard to find, they're also one of the most difficult varieties to get along with. The smallest things can agitate them, and one miscommunication is all it takes for a wild one to explode like the little rechargeable bomb it is. Fully bonded slimes still aren't fond of strangers and do have a bit of a trigger finger. They're quite protective, but they can also be quite reckless. Their pale yellow gel is unstable, naturally. It'll explode with force proportional to the amount of gel if it's shaken up too much. It doesn't have many practical uses for the moment, but it's the primary gel being heavily researched in machinery. For those fancy folks, a drop in any drink gives it a fizzy bubbling. Containing energy slimes is extremely difficult due to their hair trigger defense mechanism. They're not popular by any means, and it's a common superstition that they bring disasters wherever they go, despite the fact that they only appear after said disasters. The only real demand for them is for dedicated research facilities. Earth slimes can appear just about anywhere out in the wilderness, but they're most often found on rocky mountains and inside cave systems. They reach a core size of 6 inches after roughly 3 weeks. They're only really capable of defense, as their dirt brown gel can solidify into plates of immensely tough stone that'll block anything short of extreme cases. There's no challenge in befriending an earth slime. They're exceptionally passive and hold no interest in fighting unless it's the absolute last resort. They are very down to earth, and are rather forgiving as long as those who hurt them show at least a tiny amount of remorse. All earth slimes share the specific quirk of picking out a favorite rock, which is wildly different across individual slimes, and carrying it with them as long as they possibly can. They'll become slightly frantic without a rock of their own. Earth gel has a wide variety of uses when it comes to construction. It can be mixed with other materials as a substitute for different ingredients necessary for things like bricks or cement. It has a slight hardening effect in smaller amounts and helps keep perishables stable for longer periods of time. Of course, it tastes like dirt and has to be offset with something for foods, but that's an easy task. The usefulness of earth gel makes it one of the staples of the majority of slime ranches. The property of aiding in preserving food is exceptionally handy on its own, but it also helps cut costs for construction projects and repairs. They're common, almost entirely harmless, and quite popular. The category for metal slimes covers a wide range of subvarieties that are too numerous to count individually and too similar to split into totally separate entries. They only ever crystallize in or around cave systems, both natural and man-made. Each subvariety has a slightly different growth rate and maximum size, which ranges between a core size of 3 to 4 inches and growth rate of 3 to 4 weeks. All metal slimes share the same defense mechanism of turning themselves solid, mimicking the appearance, weight, and strength of their corresponding metal subvariety. Pieces of them that are broken off while solidified will revert back into gel. Metal slimes' normal appearances are semi-translucent versions of metal. They do also reflect some light, which makes it easy to distinguish them from similarly colored plain varieties. There are an unreasonable amount of different metal slimes that can be extremely difficult to differentiate without either testing the gel or questioning the slime itself through various methods, usually by showing them metal samples they can point to. The most useful of metal slimes are categorized into 4 tiers by rarity. Tier 1 contains copper, tin, and lead. Tier 2 contains aluminum and iron. Tier 3 contains silver and titanium. Tier 4 contains gold and platinum. Much like the amount of subvarieties, metal slimes have a range of personalities that can be mapped out with significant accuracy regardless of the sample of individual slimes themselves. The bottom tier of metal slimes, the most common, that would be tier 1, are generally friendly, but they're known to have the occasional mild mischievous streak. However, the rarer the metal slime, the more unstable they act. The rarest known subvariety, the platinum slime, is arguably closer to a monster than a slime. They're smarter than they let on and enjoy sabotaging others. They'll hop from victim to victim, stalking them for 1 to 2 weeks at a time and making the person's life a nightmare while evading capture. They are one of, if not the only, truly aggressive slime varieties. Metal gels are a little bizarre, as it's impossible to get usable metal out of the gel itself, either alone or through combining multiple different metal gels. But they can be processed with actual metal to create magical alloys. These alloys are more receptive to other magics and fuse far more easily with channeling stones than any other materials. The gels have little practical use outside the production of alloys. The demand for metal slimes varies widely because each subvariety has its own level of scarcity. Something as basic as a copper slime is going to be astronomically easier to obtain than a gold or platinum slime. Keeping top-tier metal slimes is rather difficult given their attitude, and the ranchers that do have them usually house them in a small cage. Nature slimes aren't that rare, but they only appear deep inside forests about as far away from civilization as possible. They're somewhat small, with their core growing to 3 inches in diameter after 2.5 months. The faint yellow streaks of light that glow inside them can extend outward, transforming into faux vines that it uses to protect itself and other slimes. They can use them to trap or whip attackers, or use them to pull themselves up into forest canopies where they're nigh impossible to find. When they aren't being attacked, nature slimes are among the most talkative and intelligent varieties. They'll go on about anything and everything, having extensive conversations while utilizing their vines as an extra layer of body language to convey more complicated ideas. They're known to snatch small objects from people and keep them inside their body until they get bored of it or find something else. Ones that are kept outside ranches have a tendency to occasionally disappear for hours at a time only to come back with some strange item they found, who knows where. It takes a certain kind of person to handle them without eventually losing their patience. Their light green gel has a reputation for being difficult to use. It's hard to predict and has seemingly random effects depending on the amount used. The precision required makes it an unreliable ingredient and a major risk to mix commercially. Most of its uses involve flavoring, since its unpredictability applies to taste when used in tiny amounts. Eating more than a cup at a time is not the best idea, but it has a minor antidote-like effect that can slow and sometimes cure the symptoms of poisons and venoms. It can be a pain to keep them contained, and they have low demand since you only need drops at a time for recipes. So the majority of ranchers don't have them. Most of the gel sold comes from people who simply have them as companions. Air slimes are hard to find, but not because they're rare. Despite growing to a pore size of 5 inches in a month, they are most often spotted floating with a breeze or a gust of wind. It's presumed that they crystallize at high altitudes, but good luck trying to prove it. They can travel great distances without really doing anything at all, and usually go unnoticed unless they're floating closer to the ground, or they've decided to land with a group of slimes. They're not all that great at defending anything, but they can spit a mean blast of air that'll knock most people flat. Air slimes communicate quite well, but it's really hard to get them to sit still, partially because they can make themselves weigh next to nothing, and partially because they like to float through the air at every opportunity they can. They'll bounce up themselves, but they're much happier being tossed. The higher the better as far as they're concerned. No matter where they end up, they somehow always know how to find their way back to whoever they like the most. Their grayish, foggy gel finds most of its use in the production of clothing and foods. It can help fabrics feel lighter and more breathable, while it'll make various foods fluffier. Doesn't work on solid materials though. It'll stretch it and make it brittle. The gel tends to expand if left unbottled. It's naturally a challenge to keep air slimes contained at all, but it doesn't take much more than a barn since they're fairly weak, all things considered. Most ranchers keep a few due to the stable demand for food ingredients and higher-end cloth. Electric slimes are hard to come by since they only crystallize near the hearts of thunderstorms. Many who've been in those areas looking for them say that a large amount of cores fall from the sky shortly after lightning, but only a fraction of them survive the fall. Those that don't break will grow to a core size of 3.5 inches after around 3 weeks. Their core consistently gives off electrical arcs that shoot through their deep blue body, always connecting to the surface. The arcs change in intensity based on how dangerous it is to touch them, and they'll glow faintly right before they use you as a lightning rod. Electric slimes are surprisingly calm for the most part, and can be approached no problem as long as you're at least neutral about it. They're pretty indifferent when it comes to strangers, but they're more inclined to chill out near people they know without doing all that much. However, they pull a hard 180 when something, or someone, becomes a danger to them or those they're attached to. Their intelligence shows when they're controlling the strength of their attacks to mitigate collateral damage, chasing down those who dare to flee, and making sure the danger is wiped off the face of the continent. There are plenty of experimental uses for electric gel, but it's one of the more difficult gels to work with. The gel itself is dangerous, but it has a slight energizing effect when used in very small amounts. It has a persistent electrical charge that causes burns fairly easily. Research is actively done on it to hopefully utilize it as a power source for highly experimental tech. There is a solid demand for electric slimes as protectors of sorts. They have minimal to no risk for collateral damage, and are protective of those they're bonded to. Outside of some potions and high-end research, there's little reason to keep them for gel. Water slimes are incredibly easy to find for anyone who goes out looking for one. They crystallize in larger bodies of water, lakes, rivers, marshes, seas, and even the ocean where they'll sometimes wash up onto the beach. They grow to a core size of 4 inches after somewhere around 2 months. It's hard to pinpoint because they only ever show up above water after they're fully grown, so people don't usually find them when they first appear. They're generally passive, but they can fire streams of water that can break through weaker materials and cause serious injury to anyone unprotected. It's not super difficult to befriend water slimes, but they can be snappy and a little impatient, and they're no stranger to splashing people with harmless rays of water out of annoyance, but they're generally nice as long as you're not mean about anything. They don't take slights very well though. The almost entirely clear blue gel sees nearly as much use as red gel does. Its properties mimic that of regular water, so it's the base for many drinks, both cheap and fancy. It can in fact hydrate people, despite the consistency. Both water slimes and their gel are regularly in high demand due to their usefulness in drinks and as a clean water source for those who don't have any. They can be a bit of a pain to keep and deal with, but it's always worth the extra effort. Ice slimes are quite common when compared to other elemental varieties. They appear just about anywhere that maintains a temperature below freezing year-round, the higher elevations of mountain ranges and far northern glaciers being the most common. They reach a core size of 5 inches over the period of 2 months, and they are notoriously passive. They're most often found huddling in small groups tucked into a crevice where they'll just sit there for days at a time. It's impossible to get them to attack unless you're actively trying to destroy them. Their main defense mechanism is to spit clusters of sharp ice crystals that can easily pierce skin and thin clothes, which will cause frostbite in a matter of seconds after embedding themselves into someone. Domesticated ice slimes are extraordinarily calm and are perfectly happy to sit around and just hang out. They'll communicate a decent amount if someone tries to interact with them first, but it's not entirely uncommon for them to start something, especially with people they like. They're low energy, but they understand a lot more than they let on, and are always listening. It's super easy to get along with them. Their light blue and white gel maintains a temperature well below freezing regardless of where it's being kept. So trying to handle it without some kind of protection is stupid. It has little use outside of temperature regulation, but it can be used in certain foods or drinks in tiny amounts. There's nothing like an ice-cold drink on a hot and sunny day. The demand for ice slimes is pretty limited to warm climates or more expensive luxuries, but despite that, they can be really pricey because they're usually imported from northern countries. A solid chunk of ranchers will have at least one, since it's not really a waste to have one, and they're easy to contain. Acid slimes are one of the more common elemental varieties, and while some might see them as an atypical water variety, they correlate heavily to base acid magic. That alone gives them their own classification. They grow to a core size of 4 inches over the course of a month. The only places they can be found on a consistent basis are places society would consider a health hazard. Common locations include dilapidated buildings, nasty slums, and sewers. Acid slimes are capable of dissolving most, if not all, organic or living things. The only materials they can't damage are stones and metals. They can spit immensely painful acid and cause permanent injury, so fighting them is kind of a stupid idea. Acid slimes are entirely fearless, and they don't take nonsense from anybody. They're quick to offer their input and opinions where they aren't involved, and will go off about anything, usually along the lines of complaining. The best way to befriend them is blunt honesty, even if your honesty is more mean than anything. It's something they will appreciate much more than kind words. An empty compliment will do far more damage than a strong jab. Their sickly green gel is naturally acidic and can cause significant harm if improperly handled. However, it's a staple of civilized society and the basis for the vast majority of cleaning solutions. It's used for scrubbing floors, polishing furniture, removing stains, making soaps, dissolving rust, and even clearing sewers. There are a lot of practical uses for it, which makes it one of the most widely used gels on the continent. While acid slimes are hard to contain because they'll just dissolve their way out if possible, ranches have a lot of incentive to construct a proper enclosure. Acid gel is widely used when diluted and has a constant demand, especially from the upper class. The slimes are worth a good chunk of money considering that they're not too uncommon. People can make a living sifting through slums and sewers collecting them. Light slimes are a far rarer variety than most, only appearing in places with moderate temperatures, regular amounts of full sun, and higher concentrations of stray mana. They are rather small, reaching a core size of only 2 inches after a little over a month. These slimes are typically flighty and usually hide in trees. When provoked, they flash incredibly bright light in an attempt to blind attackers and then run away or hide among other slimes. Ironically, this defense mechanism is usually how they're found by people, although their lower body mass to actual weight ratio makes them difficult to chase, let alone catch. They jump rather high and stick to forest canopies for the most part. Once domesticated, they're quite friendly and tend to attach themselves to a single person, being far more willing to communicate and interact with them over others. They're high energy and highly communicative, picking up on languages far quicker than other slimes. They adapt rather well, but it can take a long time for them to bond with someone else. Their white glittery gel serves mainly as the positive base for potions and material base for lamp crystals. It has some cosmetic uses due to its light-producing properties, but it's only for very specific things. While it's technically edible, it's not exactly the best idea to eat more than a cup's worth. It has a relatively high potency and can be difficult to work with if one isn't well prepared or experienced. White slime's rarity and usefulness makes them highly sought after. Buying them is out of the question for anybody who falls into the middle class, and most people who find them sell them. Many of the products their gel is used for are equally pricey. Lamp crystals are a luxury, while potions made with it are often diluted. Larger, established ranches tend to have a few on hand. Dark slimes are rare and extremely difficult to find. They're one of the smallest varieties, with cores that grow to 1.5 inches in diameter after a month and a half, give or take. They almost never appear outside the depths of caves, and even then they'll hide and remain completely motionless, making themselves next to impossible to see if you don't have a bright light or don't know what to look for. They have no real defense mechanisms beyond that, and will often group with other cave-dwelling slimes for protection. Domesticated dark slimes are fairly quiet, comparatively speaking, and they stick close to other slimes or people they know well. They tend to form strong connections to a few people at a time and become more sociable when in a small group. While they don't communicate as much as other varieties, they enjoy being included. The minutely transparent black gel's only practical use is as a negative potion base, which is already an uncommon practice on its own. Using it for anything material has virtually no effect, and nobody ever eats it because it makes people feel rather ill for at least a few days. Due to the sheer difficulty in finding them and the lack of practical uses, dark slimes are never in enough demand to warrant ranches acquiring any. The few that are found end up as household pets more often than not. Void slimes are the rarest known non-atypical slime in existence. They have no select environment and just appear at random all over the continent. So the only real way to find them is to wander and hope you run into one by chance. They are on the smaller side, with a core that grows to 3 inches in diameter over the course of a couple of months. They're incredibly skittish and can warp a significant distance away if they sense even the tiniest bit of a threat. They are the only slime that lives in solitude for the most part. Domesticated void slimes are naturally shy and communicate very minimally, if at all. It takes someone with an incredible amount of patience to truly bond with one. But once they have, the slime becomes much more sociable with that specific person. They'll stick quite close and tend towards liking to be carried or simply sit on people wherever they can. The dark purple gel vibrates and flickers between solid and incorporeal states, making it extremely unstable. It's almost impossible to work with and takes a truly skilled mixer to utilize. The only use it has is in the production of channeling stones, of which it's an invaluable part of. Void slimes are worth more than the entirety of a small country. Anybody who managed to find one can sell it to dominant countries for more money than they'd ever be able to spend in their lifetime. They're reserved for elite production and research facilities, and their exact whereabouts are closely guarded secrets. Tar slimes are a bit of an odd existence, as while they're not exactly rare, they only appear in extremely specific environments. Mud pits in marshes with very low water levels, higher temperatures, and low amounts of sunlight. Their cores grow to a maximum of 4 inches in diameter over a long period of time, 4 months on average. They are naturally slow-moving and tend not to stray too far from a single location where up to a dozen other tar slimes will gather. When threatened, they tend to launch a well-coordinated volley of bits of their own gel, which can easily end up suffocating their attacker. Domesticated tar slimes are calm to the point of sometimes being slow to respond to communication attempts from people. They'll communicate more freely with other slimes, however. It can be a little difficult to get them to move if they aren't in the mood, but they don't like being left behind and will follow others without issue. Their pitch black, sticky, and somewhat elastic gel has a variety of niche uses, but it's typically used for making construction mortar and salves for minor injuries. In tiny amounts, it can be used in foods to soften them and give them a slight elasticity. Candies made using tar gel are quite popular. The value of tar slimes mostly depends on how close a settlement is to where they appear. They're often exported to faraway lands at high prices, despite how common they can be in their natural environment. Demand for them fluctuates a lot, so specialized ranches are the only ones that really keep them. It's thought that tar slimes might be an atypical variety of water or earth slimes, but they're far too common for that to be viable, so they're classified individually. Gore slimes are almost never seen outside of gruesome battlefields, graveyards, or the corpses of large monsters. They appear in numbers proportional to the amount of blood and death that's been soaked into the earth, reaching a core size of 5 inches in diameter at an insane rate of just a few days. When attacked, they do little more than grow spikes of bone to keep their opponent from getting too close. They don't stray far from the bodies they appear near, and any nearby bodies decay at a much higher rate until all that's left is bone. Battlefields with thousands of corpses can be desiccated in a week or two. Once there's nothing left, the slimes just wander off. They'll usually all be killed pretty quickly because of their low intelligence and unwillingness or inability to cooperate with each other. The majority of gore slimes are, well, they're dull. They don't move or communicate much at all, often being totally unresponsive to anything that doesn't pose a threat. Even domesticated slimes show a lack of conscious thought when compared to any other variety of slime. Atypical varieties are still slow and somewhat lifeless in a lot of ways. Gore gel is an imitation of blood with bits of flesh and bone mixed in. It smells atrocious and seems to rot after being taken from a slime, albeit at a slower rate. The maniacs that have tried to find practical uses for it have always come out empty-handed. It'll make anything naturally repulsive. It's unclear why gore slimes exist in the first place, as accelerating decay is mostly pointless, and other slimes will crystallize regardless of how many bodies there are. They're an enigma that no sane person would keep around as a pet of any sort. Finally, that's all of the main ones. Good lord. 4 paragraph entries doesn't sound too bad until you have to read 24 of them out loud at once. I thought maybe I'd have extra comments for each variety, but I didn't, so oh well. I don't really care that much. These ideas of mine are public domain, same as the last video. Check the description if you're skeptical. Next time I'll explain the atypicals more, I guess, or whatever I feel like, as usual.